Lofts it to Harris, who collects it, gets around Borland, and leaps to the end zone.
We set this as a goal to potentially be the greatest team to ever play, and I think we made a valid statement in winning the national championship tonight.
In a season of chaos, the Crimson Tide are the conference.
You are listening to The Review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a championship edition of The Review. It's the Online Sports Guys College Football Podcast where we're talking about everything that happened in the world of college football. And it's a three-way dance today with me, OSG Phil, OSG J-Dub, OSG Nelson. Brother Wilkie is on assignment.
World. He's functioning with his other job.
Yeah. He has a life.
Yeah. He's the polite way is he's on assignment this week.
Yeah, there you go. He's on assignment.
And folks, if you're tuning in this week, we're coming to you a couple days later because we didn't want to record where we normally do on Sunday evening because, well, we were going to talk mostly about the championship game anyway, and it would be dated by the next day. So we waited a couple days. And, well, now we've watched the championship game, and to the surprise of nobody, we have a national champion team here, and it's Alabama. Guys, did either of you get a chance to watch any of that?
I watched the first half and watched the human highlight reel, human cheat code, Devontae Smith.
Jones flips it to him. Devontae headed for the end zone, and Alabama back on top.
Put up a clinic. It was like 11 catches for 12 catches for like 215 yards and 3 touchdowns in the first half before he got hurt in the second half. But yeah, I watched that the gap there and turned it off. I didn't watch the second half at all.
I was pretty much the same. I was drifting in and out because as you so eloquently put in your column over at theonlinesportsguys.com, it just gets to a point where you're just kind of sitting there and you're looking at your clock and you're going, okay, yeah, okay.
I can say I watched a little bit now.
Yeah.
Watched some, and yeah, it's just kind of boring. Doink, and you try and find something else. Look, I mean, last night, I'll tell you. All right, I am coming from the Gulf of Mexico. Not physically in it, but I can look out windows off to my left.
Very close nearby.
It's very close nearby. And the cable system is a little different here. I was able to watch the Tampa Bay Raptors take on Portland with the cable that was here using Rogers Sportsnet feed, which was on Sun Sports whatever. So that's the kind of stuff that I was able to watch yesterday. It was during the same thing. Yeah, Tampa Bay / Toronto and Portland. That's the kind of stuff that we're getting here. And on Wednesday, you got hockey and all these other kinds of things. So yeah, I was kind of drifting in and out of other traffic. But yeah, the novelty of seeing the Tampa Bay Raptors playing Portland to me last night, that was more fun than the second half of the game that we were talking about.
and down here up here in OSG Carolinas, I was watching the Hurricanes had their scrimmage yesterday, and Pesci's back, so I was looking at some of that stuff. So yeah, I was doing kind of double duty too. But it got after Alabama put up 28 points in the second quarter, I was like, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, and on one hand, it was kind of impressive, whatever other descriptive adjective you want to use, to watch, to see just how they literally dissected Ohio State in the game. On the other hand, yeah, after a certain point, it's like, okay, I've seen this before. Why do I need to see it again? And it's going to lead into a conversation here that I'll get into a little further in the show. But I think the thing that stood out to me the most was the Alabama offense and the way Steve Sarkisian was calling plays, the plays that they were actually running. Ohio State didn't have an answer, and it's not like they were lacking for game tape.
No.
Nope. And to that point, I think it was Devontae Smith's second touchdown. Ohio State had some kind of a change in defense, and they had their slowest linebacker on number 6.
Jones steps up right down the middle of the field. It's touchdown, Devontae Smith.
Okay, that's a defensive fail. You don't put a linebacker on the human cheat code, and he walked into the end zone from like 30 yards. So, I mean, Ohio State, I wouldn't necessarily say they were underprepared, but they were underprepared.
I mean, it's just you look at the confusion, and obviously when you're talking about the absences of 9 or 10 guys, especially guys like Togiai on the defensive front, that creates a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
When Trey Sermon gets injured in his first carry, that creates a depth issue. Although, when you have your master come in and serve you well in the first half before he gets figured out and the game tape is out there.
Yep.
Well, I mean, in the first half, Alabama's defense was servant to master when it came to him running the football. But it goes to a couple of different things. I think the absences that Ohio State had going in, I think were going to create problems. The injuries that happened in game created problems. And I think that just when you look at the depth that Alabama had in this game, you lose a 5-star for targeting in your defensive secondary. So what do? You throw in another 5-star. It is wash, rinse, and repeat for Alabama in this case. And I think that you just get to the point to where you can't trade 3s for 7s.
Nope.
We're talking about 4-point plays. And when Ohio State was, back and forth playing, 21st century Pong with Alabama, and it was 7-7, 14, great, fine. You get to 21-14, you can't follow that up with a field goal. You've got to find ways to convert 4th downs if you have to continue to work it down the field. And when you're trading 3s for 7s, obviously it's going to be the death of you, and it eventually did, where it was just, you just shake your head at just how easy it looked at times for Alabama offensively, going up against a defense that didn't have the depth to match all of the large posteriors that were there on the offensive line for Alabama. J-Dub, and you know what it means when an offensive line has rather large posteriors. If my butt's bigger than yours, I can work my way down the field a lot easier against the defensive front.
And some of the best times I had as an offensive lineman was when you just literally had to put your butt between the defensive lineman and the back would literally just skirt right off your butt. Like you stand between them, and you give that type of a break. You give somebody like Najee Harris a gap that's this big, he's gone. And he only got 79 yards on the ground yesterday, but he also –
though.
Exactly. So you got to think about that. And he also put it up, almost 80 yards receiving as well. So, but Alabama just dominated it. And the one thing that came to my mind, Steve Sarkisian's leaving to go to Texas. I think this was an exclamation point game for him to tell the Texas boosters, you made the right decision by hiring me. Like, this is the kind of stuff I'm going to bring to Austin. And I just, in the back of my mind, that was why he was, foot to the gas pedal the whole game, in my mind, to say, Texas, you made the right call.
Well, let me ask you guys this. 5, 7, maybe 10 years ago, when we're having a conversation about an Alabama football team, did you ever think that we would be talking about everything that they've done on offense and nothing about what they did on defense?
No.
They've completely adjusted what they do, how they do it, and the way they do it. And they are everything that modern college football has become about, and that's to score points and score points in bunches. Ohio State had to play an absolutely perfect, flawless game just to even have a chance last night.
Yeah, and you think about, I'm a Washington football team fan, so I'm very happy to have John Allen and Deron Payne on the line. But you go back even to when Derrick Henry was running back or Mark Ingram, they were good offensive pieces, but Alabama was known for their defense. And last night their defense played second fiddle to Mac Jones. Mac Jones with 464 yards and 5 touchdowns. He came out, could do no wrong yesterday. And I have not been a fan of Mac Jones all year. I've given him respect for what he's been able to do, but I'm like John. I can't give Alabama props for a whole lot of anything because, being a Tennessee fan, I tend to not like Alabama or Georgia. Sorry. But Mac Jones last night came out and looked the part of a national championship quarterback. And you at Ohio State, or even if anybody else, you got to tip your hat and say Alabama was the best team in the country last night.
They've been the best team in the country probably the entire year.
Yep.
And think about this for a second. In years past, what we have seen, let's say 10 years ago with Alabama, J-Dub, to your point, it's Mark Ingram, it's Derrick Henry, it is smash mouth football. And Alabama and Nick Saban and his staffs have evolved from basically 10 feet and whatever else is a bonus to your 4 and 5 wides, your vertical and your horizontal, and not just stuff between the tackles. And I think that Nick Saban and the staff and the guys he hires and the guys he brings in, it has been evolution over time. You're finding different ways to win things. If it's running game and defense a decade ago, and you're seeing assistants now trying to do the same thing, in all honesty, those assistants who are now head coaches, unless they have the same personnel that Alabama had at the time, when you're looking at the stereotype, you're a decade behind Alabama. You are 7 to 10 years behind Alabama and where they are ahead of the curve when it comes to how they're diagnosing what the landscape is and what it takes to win. It used to be running and the occasional third down completion on a pass, maybe pass on first down to change things up. Now it's athletes, it's 5 wide, it's having, 7 or 8 fantastic receivers that you can throw to at any given time. Alabama has evolved, and it's up to everyone else to catch up.
And to your point, John, you think about Georgia. Look at Kirby Smart. How many 5-star athletes has that Saban assistant coach brought into Athens? And how many national championships does he have to show for it? 0. And how much success has he had against Saban? 0. So, it takes more than athletes. It takes more than boots on the ground. Like you said, it takes that evolution, that progression. And give Nick Saban credit. He is pushing that envelope. And I agree with you completely that all of his other assistants, Jeremy Pruitt included, are playing catch up and will for probably their entire career.
Yeah, in fact, you bring up Georgia. You could easily make the argument right now that Georgia's about Alabama about 5 or 6 years ago. Really, really good on defense.
And that's absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But once again, you're 6 years, you're 6 years behind present day. That's the hook in all of this. What worked a decade ago isn't what's working now. Alabama is showing you what's working now, and it's up to the rest of college football to catch up. And right now, as you say, they're 5 or 6 years behind. And unless someone steps up to the table and tries to match present day Alabama, everyone is still going to be 5 or 6 years behind the curve.
And that makes me wonder if Clemson, in the Clemson-Ohio State game, if Clemson was looking to Alabama and didn't give Ohio State credit, because Ohio State blew them out of the water. And I honestly think Clemson-Alabama would have been a better game. The result would have been the same. But I think the way Dabo Swinney calls a game, I think that would have put just Clemson in a better position to win. I mean, Ohio State was just outclassed, outmanned, outgunned, out everything yesterday. And even in a perfect situation, Phil, like you mentioned earlier, I don't think a perfect game from Justin Fields and a healthy Trey Sermon would have made a darn bit of difference.
I think Clemson's defense probably would have given up more points than Ohio State's did. And that brings me to the other question that I had, and that's Ohio State. For all the grief they got about people saying they don't belong because they didn't play enough games, they didn't have a big enough record. You could make the argument that was the second best team in college football, but that second best team in college football is here. Alabama is here.
Yep.
And I don't think Clemson, I don't think Notre Dame, I don't think Texas A&M or anybody else you could make the argument with belonged into that playoff was ever going to give Alabama any kind of a run.
No, not at all. No. And I had maintained the entire time that Ohio State should have been in the CFP. They should have been in the group of 4. And, once again, it's what's best for business. We've had the conversation in the past, but I thought that they belonged. But once again, there's that gap of talent, of individuals, and of game planning and of coaching staffs. And now we're hearing that Bill O'Brien takes over for the Nick Saban Reclamation Coaches Project.
The Nick Saban Coaching Rehabilitation Clinic.
The coaching rehab clinic is going to be Bill O'Brien is going to be the next individual in there. So, but no, I think that right now it is boring as hell, but you cannot deny it is Alabama and everybody else.
Yep, and absolutely. And you talk about the Reclamation Project. Look what it did for Sark. About 5 years ago, we thought he was done. You know, he was going back and forth as coordinators and assistants and, you know, consultants, and now he's leading a Power 5 team at Texas. So I mean, there's something got to be said for that Reclamation Project and what Saban does for these guys.
It worked for Lane Kiffin too.
I'm not going to talk about him.
Let me ask you guys this.
Block.
Everything that we've talked about here all kind of circles back to the same place, and that's Nick Saban.
Mm-hmm.
He may be polarizing. There's people who don't like him. There's people who think he's evil. He's the devil incarnate and all that stuff. The guy's a coaching genius at the end of the day.
No question.
No question.
And everything that we've just talked about, the assistant coaches, the players, the talent, the Reclamation Project, everything circles back to him.
Mm-hmm.
Is there been a college football coach that's been more successful, had a more successful tree, and adjusted what he does to the modern evolution of the game better than what he's done?
Take it, Jada.
I mean, in modern day, you think about, you know, Bear Bryant's in the old school football, the guys that were very successful back then. But now, modern day, I don't know if I could think of any current coach or recently retired coach that I could even put on his level. As much as I don't like Nick Saban, like, I'm going to throw this in here, I hate the way he played Jalen Waddle last night. Jalen Waddle should not have played. His ankle was not 100%. I know it's a national championship game, but I stand by he should have been on the sidelines, just like he played with Tua when Tua was hurt. I just have a problem with that as a player. But from a coach's standpoint, I can't think of anybody modern day that I could say is anywhere near as successful and as knowledgeable of the game and football DNA that he possesses and can adjust his game to fit his recruits. And it is like, I just can't think of anyone off the top of my head.
No, and I don't think that Leatherwood should have played. I don't think that Jalen Waddle should have played, because as the Florida State alum on this show, I get Richie flashbacks.
Yep.
Check your Google and search College World Series for Richie Lewis. But you, in the modern day, it's a point that I've made in the past. How many assistants that have been in the Reclamation Project campground have left Tuscaloosa and beaten Nick Saban? The answer, 0. Because what that says to me is that he'll teach you everything when you're there, but he won't teach you everything he knows when you're there. And there is a distinct difference in that. And you see that once again, you look at the University of Georgia. Where are they? 5 or 6 years behind philosophically where the University of Alabama is when it comes to running their offense. They're trying to do early 2010s Alabama football in Athens right now. And having that going up against modern day Alabama football, you will not win, because once again, Nick Saban taught you everything that you learned when you were there. He didn't teach you everything he knew that you learned when you were there. Distinct difference. And once again, that is why Alabama will be ahead of the curve. That's why Georgia, until they change things philosophically, they'll always be behind the curve. Pick another assistant. That's why that assistant will always be behind the curve. That's why the other schools in the Southeastern Conference will be behind the curve until someone can match him philosophically, or in those instances where you have someone who thinks outside the box just a little bit and works on deception, works on things that are at the back of the playbook. But in that coach's playbook, they're not in the back. They might be in the back in Tuscaloosa, but they're not in the back at that other school. Those instances, while rare, are what sets Alabama back a step, keeps them from national championships. It's those singular instances, but not a team with a philosophy, and that's a distinct difference.
And if you think about Saban is an expert clock manager. He's an expert situational coach. And it's like, that's what I said earlier. He's got some incredible football DNA, and he sets his coaches up to succeed. Like when I was at Wake Forest, 3rd and 17, we're running a draw. Regardless, we're not throwing the ball because Dooley was the old trench fighter. 5 yards in a cloud of dust, that was what we did. And in the 90s, you could get away with that. But you have to be able to evolve and change. And Saban's knowledge of the game, and he hires the greatest people, and they give him their feedback, their situation, their calls in the moment. And he takes that DNA in his head and goes, okay, here's how I would apply that. And there's not a coach in the Southeastern Conference. There's not a coach in football that can go up toe-to-toe with Saban on football DNA. He will outcoach you every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And I hate to say that, but he's the best coach in football.
With the best athletes.
Yep. That helps.
In maybe not the best at the best facilities, but certainly in the top 5. And yeah, at the end of the day, if you got a kid that wants to play for a national championship and Alabama comes recruiting, there's a pretty good chance that kid's going to go play there.
Mm-hmm. Why would you turn down a perennial national championship team? Why would you turn that down?
Yeah, and I'm interested to see what happens with Sark going to Texas, because you've got that original creative play caller, the guy who can make a difference on offense because of the way he calls football games.
And he's outside the Southeastern footprint.
Yep.
Can do things in his own conference over here. He doesn't have to face Nick Saban until the postseason. He can work in his lab off to the side and try to turn things in the Big 12 away from the Southeastern Conference. I think that may help him in developing what he wants to do at Texas.
And it'll be interesting because it gives him access to facilities and the potential to grab some football players out of Texas who can compete on the same level as an SEC football team.
Yep.
And I'm really curious to see how that plays out.
I'm interested to see what kind of recruiting he can do, because right now he's still dealing with Tom Herman players, and to see what he can do recruiting wise. His success in Texas, his success in Austin is going to be determined by what players he gets. And you could be the best offensive play caller in the world, like when Texas A&M Cliff Kingsbury, right? If you're a great offensive mind and you have subpar athletes like Les Miles at Kansas, that's the only time I'll mention them in this podcast. Nothing's going to happen. So it's going to be determined what kind of recruits he gets. But I wish him the best of luck. I think the Big 12 needs somebody like a Sark in that conference, and I think that conference is ready to be stood on its ear, because Gundy has been able to run roughshod in that. No one's been able to go up against Oklahoma State or Iowa State. But yeah, it's time that a new voice goes in the Big 12, and that's one other person to defeat Kansas twice a year.
And if I'm in the Southwestern United States and I want to be chased after by Steve Sarkisian, I go walking into a recruit's living room. I go on to a Zoom call. I go on to a Skype call with a recruit. You know what I bring up on my laptop? The game that we saw Monday night.
Absolutely.
You want to come play for Texas? You want to bring Texas to national championship competition?
This is what I can do for you.
This is what I can do for you. Literally, you take that iPad, you hold it up to the lens of the camera. You sit there and say, see this? You can be a part of this. And that is one of the largest selling cards that you can have if you're Sark at Texas. And that's a hell of a selling card, considering what he did to show you what is on that fictitious iPad.
And as an offensive lineman, I don't want to go to a school that's got a one-star running back, and no skill players, because that makes my job harder. If I can see that a school is recruiting consistently 3, 4, 5-star running backs, 3, 4, 5-star wide receivers and quarterbacks, as an offensive lineman, sign me the heck up, because that means I'm blocking for somebody that appreciates the hole I'm making for them. And it makes my job a lot easier, especially to have someone that's going to appreciate the work you put in as a lineman. And so I agree with Nelson completely. That game from last night needs to be on repeat with him for recruits. It needs to be on repeat, on loop.
A clinic on how to coach college football in the 2020s.
Yep.
Guys, why don't you say we wrap it up here on the first half of the show here. When we come back in the second half of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about what this all means. Are we stuck in an era and an endless loop in the college football playoff of the same 4 teams playing for the same title every year? the relevance of it all, that and much, much more when we come back for the second half of the review. You are listening to the review on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network.
The OSG app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG app and listen to our podcasts from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Download the OSG app today.
If you've been hurt in a car wreck, contact my friend Steve Apolinski of Apolinski & Associates. He's been representing individuals for over 30 years throughout Georgia and Alabama. Email him at steve@aa-legal.com or call him 24/7 at 404-377-9191. The initial consultation is free.
We know that every driver is different, and a one-size policy does not fit all. That's why Country Financial offers a variety of discounts, so you get the coverage you need and the savings you deserve. From good driver to good student, multi-policy to multi-car, we've got a discount to suit every driver. Call Jason Wright at 678-568-6871 today to see what you could save. On Facebook at Jason Wright Agency or by phone at 678-568-6871. Discounts vary by state. Policies issued by Country Mutual Insurance Company, Country Preferred Insurance Company, or Country Casualty Insurance Company, Bloomington, Illinois.
But to be the man, you gotta beat the man, and I'm saying, woo!
Congratulations, folks. You've made it to the second half of the review. We are the Online Sports Guys, and this is our college football look back at the week that was in the world. It's called The Review. I am OSG Phil, OSG Nelson, and OSG J-Dub on the line this week as we talk about the national championship game, the implications, and where things go from here. Guys, it was more or less the same as it ever was when it comes to the championship, the playoff this year, because as much as Alabama was impressive and as dominant as they were in their two games, the fact that they were there, Clemson was there, Ohio State was there, and to a lesser extent, Notre Dame was there. It's the same more or less the same four teams. I mean, you could add in arguably Oklahoma, maybe Georgia, LSU last year. That's really about it in terms of the teams that are going to ever be there on that short list of teams in the playoff.
I mean, cue the talking heads clip because it's exactly the truth. I mean, I loved seeing Kellen Mond and A&M make a run this year. I mean, whether you like Kyle Trask or the Kyle Show at all, it was nice to see Florida make a run this year. Coastal and Liberty were the darlings of the bracket. But yeah, when it comes down to it, these four teams, it's like, yeah, been there, done that.
It's not likely to change anytime soon, John. It's how do we get from where we are to where college football is a more competitive game?
No, it's right now, and it goes back to it legitimately goes back to the conversation that we had in the first block. If you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. Ain't nobody beating the man right now. And the only way to become a champion, first thing you got to do, you got to act like a champion. It's the inverse of saying the first step in fixing a problem is admitting that you have one. Maybe it is the same thing. Then if you have a problem, then you got to understand that there is a problem somewhere in your infrastructure. And I could be talking about any school that wants to knock the king off the mountain. Until you understand that there is something in your system, it could be systemic, it could be anywhere in the line. Somewhere in your line of production, you are not matching what's going on in Tuscaloosa. Nope. And until you fix your production line and figure out, am I bringing in the right widget? Do I have the right personnel assembling all of the cars on the line the right way? Well, why is my engine only 350 horsepower and not 456? Why does my car coming off the line not have a Hemi and theirs does? It's going to take systemic breakdowns of every single aspect of your program, from nutrition to workouts to the personnel to the recruiting. how you go about recruiting, implementation of game plans, and being ahead of the curve. This is literally tearing down every aspect of the foundation of your program, whoever your program is, trying to sit there and compare it to the guy who right now is the champion, figure out what they're doing in differentiation to what you're not, and then contorting what your thought pattern is to match that and get it there. That, J-Dub, is what you have to look at. Literally, it is taking it brick by brick, figure out your foundation, figure out what's wrong, and rebuild your house.
I'm going to ignore the Butch Jones brick by brick statement there.
That was unintentional. I was specifically talking like Ty Pennington or something.
But going back to a point you said in the first block, Ohio State came into this game with plenty of game film. Alabama didn't do anything unremarkable that they haven't done all year. So talking about preparation, systemic overhaul of a team, your film reviews there. I mean, teams need to be able to put in the work, look at the film, game plan, come up with these outside the box thinking to combat these things, because literally Mac Jones dropped back. Now, granted, he's the Davey O'Brien Award winner, stepped back and, threw for 5 touchdowns and a bunch of yards. You can combat that when you have defensive game plan. Ohio State came out flat-footed and unprepared, and that's why that's why they didn't have a shot against Saban yesterday. Now, I do want to bring this out to the point for the both of you guys. Speaking of Mac Jones, he came out yesterday in the post game and said that this particular Crimson Tide team is the best team to ever play college football.
We set this as a goal to potentially be the greatest team to ever play, and I think we made a valid statement in winning the national championship tonight.
Agree or disagree?
Nope.
No.
I thought that was a very weighted statement.
Well, but the thing is that for me, when you're asking me about these kinds of comparisons, I don't compare eras. I'm not going to sit here and say, people ask, okay, so who's the best home run hitter of all time? I'm not going to do that. I don't go down that road, because I don't compare, because the games themselves are different. Pitching is different. The mound is different. It's not the way it was when Bob Gibson had the ERA of 112. It's not juiced balls and humidors and performance enhancing drugs. It's different eras that you're looking at when you're talking about best ofs in other sports. This is the best run of any school in the modern era. I will grant them that. I will not say the best ever, because once again, the game evolves and the game has changed. How it was with the Naval Academy in the 40s, how it was with A&M, how it was with Alabama, how it was with USC, how it was with Notre Dame. All of these different eras bring different characteristics. The way things are right now, the way the system is in place in Tuscaloosa, I would say this is the best run of the modern era that we've seen at Alabama. Best of, best ever, not so fast.
Would you put it up? It's a factory school, no doubt. Would you put a Clemson or something like that as far as a similar type of a situation? Like, is Clemson set up with a next man up type of philosophy the same way Tuscaloosa is? Or like if you were going to compare Dabo and Saban right now?
The best example of why this isn't the best team in history is simple. Look back 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
LSU.
Yeah.
LSU beat them. LSU played in the national championship. LSU won that national championship with an offense that was just as dangerous, just as good, and just as deep as Alabama, and a defense that was on the equivalent.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree with you completely on that.
Yeah. You can't make that. You can't even make the comparison right now, because you're just coming off on the heels of that. Now, granted, everybody's memory is short term, and these days doesn't seem to last more than a couple of weeks.
There's recency bias.
But you can't say that. You can say it's one of the best teams in college football history.
Yeah.
No question about that. But to say that they're the greatest, that's kind of stretching things a bit.
Calm down, son. Calm down.
Then I'll ask you this next question. The second tier schools, like the bubble, like the 5 to 10 schools, the Oklahomas, the A&Ms, the Floridas, outside of recruiting Alabama level players, what are they going to have to do to be able to compete? Because you look at the SEC West, the way LSU went from basically first to worst, you know, you got to think about how the conference was and how the SEC East was with Florida and Georgia, the cream of the crop in that division. What are schools going to have to do to go up against a Saban type of offensive defensive structure? What else are they going to have to do to compete?
And that's kind of where I was going with the whole topic here. It comes down to money, at least in my opinion. Those schools that are in the playoff every year have cashed in to a much larger extent than everybody else has. There's been some money for everybody, but it's proportionally not spread out well enough. And because of that, you've got Alabama or Clemson with their $50 million athletic building with a lazy river winding through it and things like that. There's majority of the 130 teams in the football bowl subdivision, they can't do that. They don't have that kind of money. And until you have that kind of money and recruiting budget and can have unpaid consultants like Saban does, when you can have a half dozen former head coaches making $20,000 a year as unpaid consultants because they're getting paid by other schools, yeah, you're going to have an advantage. And it's kind of hard to change that. Clemson, the same thing. You can't compete with that. Look at my alma mater, Georgia Southern. We're never going to get to compete with that, ever. Mm-mm. And we're even playing in for the same title. We're never going to get to compete for that title. Ever.
I mean, you even look at me when I played at Wake Forest. I mean, Wake Forest was perennially the David to everybody's Goliath. And, you know, my sophomore year, we went 8-5, went to the Independence Bowl. Fantastic. Outside of that, I think we won 5 games. So these little schools, these second tier Power 5 conference schools they're not going to get the recruiting power. They're not going to get the coaching power. They're not going to get the financing power to be able to put up. Because think about how much money Alabama has saved during COVID, how much other schools have lost COVID revenue because their nest eggs have either been shrunk or they're now non-existent. Alabama was able to shoulder that along with schools like Clemson and Ohio State, dare I say even Michigan, because they had the nest egg there. These, like you look at Georgia Southern or Coastal Carolina, had a fantastic year. They'll never compete on the level of an Alabama right now. They're not even going to be given a shot.
And that's why we have here on the show and on the network maintained that within the current bowl structure or some way to do it, that the Go Fives should have their own thing and they should have their own, they should have their own Group of 5 championship tournament to prove that it can be done, much like in every other classification of NCAA football outside of FBS, Division I, whatever you want to call it. Have your own tournament. So that way you can see quality matchups like we had this past year, where you got to see BYU and Coastal Carolina on a moment's notice.
And it worked.
And it was awesome.
Have these kinds of games that can showcase the Group of 5. And don't think for a second that the 4-letter wouldn't jump on something like this in accordance with ESPN events, with the bowl games that they already have in place. So the Group of 5 can have their own tournament and they can show you the best of the rest when it comes to football. Sure, play it up like it's the college football version of the NIT, whatever you want to call it. The Miss Congeniality contest, trot out Sandra Bullock as Gracie Lee Freebush and have her give the sash and the crown to the champion of the whole thing when it's over, and have Benjamin Bratt and Michael Caine off to the side or something like that. Create your own tournament, because if you're not going to be allowed to hang out at Encino Oaks Country Club, what do? You build your own.
I'm all for that.
You have Caddy Day.
You have Caddy Day at Bushwood. And you make sure that you're the team that gets to throw the Baby Ruth bar into the pool and walk out.
It's a floater.
Duty.
It'd be absolutely awesome to see the duty being thrown into the Power 5s. I would love every minute of it, and it would make for fantastic television.
But then you have Mark Emmert opposing the idea to separate FBS from NCAA. He comes out and says it couldn't disagree more with separating FBS from NCAA. I mean, if he's not going to do that with the FBS, how is the Go Fives? How are they going to even do that? I mean, are they all just going to walk away on their own?
J-Dub, Mark Emmert is operating under the premise that the Power Fives won't go and create the CFA version 2.0 on their own anyway. So all he would have left are the Go Fives in the first place. So if all the Power Fives just decided to go and recreate the CFA, and ABC picked up the CFA Game of the Week like they did, back in the 1980s, you've got this. You've pinned yourself into a corner when it comes to your product. You have no say. You can sit there and you can stand up all you want. You could stand up on the tallest tree and the tallest table. You could build a tree house you could have a megaphone. You could sit there and say, "You can't do this." What's gonna cause all of these Power Five conferences to sit there and say, "Want to bet? Watch us. Peace out," and have them go this way? Absolutely nothing. The NCAA has not really shown itself to have any teeth when it comes to enforcement, regardless of what they're trying to enforce.
Nope.
So if they think for a half a second that the Power Five schools, if they're given an ultimatum by Indianapolis, they're going to say, yeah, we got a thing. Yeah, we got a thing. We'll see you later. What time is it? Oh, it's time to go.
It goes back to what I said. He who has all the money has the last word.
Golden rule. It literally is the golden rule.
And
has the gold, makes the rules.
And there is not anybody in that grouping of teams who's been in the college football playoff since its inception that's going to be willing to share any of that money. No. And until we figure out a way to do that, nothing's going to change.
And think about it.
Football has so many traditions and norms that have to be adjusted, changed, or adapted for modern times that it's not happening.
And to think about how much money the NCAA would lose if the FBS split off. I mean, that's billions of dollars of revenue that the NCAA would lose.
It's not even them. It's the schools themselves. The contracts aren't with the NCAA. ESPN's not paying the NCAA to broadcast FBS games.
The Southeastern Conference, they have their own friggin' network. They have their own 2 friggin' networks, the SEC and the ACC. It ain't with the NCAA.
Nope.
And they're not going to want to share that. And ultimately, something's got to give because you've got opposing forces pulling at the same rope. And that rope's only so strong. You could go another 4 or 5 years, and we could be having the same exact conversation in 2028 when we're talking about Alabama winning their 12th out of the last 18 years of national championships, this time over Clemson as opposed to Ohio State. Nothing's changed other than the faces.
Yep.
And that's great if you're an alumni or a fan of those particular schools.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the people that draw the eyeballs. But at the end of the day, how interested or how vested is everybody else going to be when they know there's no chance? That's got to give at some point.
It's going to come down to ratings and sponsors. And as long as those 3.5-hour blocks in the trilogy that is the college football playoff continues to be a high-selling, high-rated, high-attentioned trilogy of television series every single year, it isn't going to change. If the sponsors are happy, the network is happy, and everyone is doing what's best for business, and that means having all those big name blue bloods in there. You're not going to bring in the Mariana Widget Factory as your number 4 team. If you're looking at the Dow Jones, if the Dow Jones Industrial Average is having a playoff, you're not going to bring in the Mariana's Widget Factory as one of the teams, because that's not what's best for business. It's not going to change.
And if you think about the actual people who've won the national championship, of the last 15 years, 11 of them have come out of the Southeastern Conference. I mean, you had Florida State win one in 2013, Ohio State won in 2014. Clemson won a couple in 16 and 18, but the rest of them come out of the Southeastern Conference. So in my mind, they're that conference is the driving force. And if they decided to push a split, I bet you other conferences would follow suit, especially of the Power Fives.
Change the subject here really quick as we need to kind of start wrapping things up here on the show. A couple of little news nuggets here. Interesting coaching change as former Auburn defensive coordinator Kevin Steele has resurfaced at Tennessee.
Yes, he has.
Defensive coordinator for Jeremy Pruitt,
Yeah.
as long as Jeremy Pruitt stays in place.
Sure.
Yep.
Good move, bad move, indifferent move. Not going to change anything.
The check cashes and you've got a long-term deal.
I mean, Auburn still owes Steele like what, $5-6 million from the contract he signed in January. But he was the highest paid defensive coordinator in college football. So getting him in Tennessee is a coup. I think it's a good hire. Another Saban assistant to work for another Saban assistant. I mean, they work together in Alabama between him and Pruitt. But I think it's just, putting lipstick on a pig. At the end of the day, it's still a pig. And Tennessee's defense is still going to be subpar. I don't care who you got running the defense. Tennessee is not going to compete in the division. So in a sense, this isn't going to change a thing in the Southeastern SEC East at all.
Nope.
One other notable coaching change that was the cat kind of got out of the bag yesterday, and that's Steve Sarkisian's replacement at Alabama appears to be Bill O'Brien, the former head coach of the Houston Texans, former head coach at Penn State. Looks like he's going to take over and run the offense there. That's going to be an interesting one. O'Brien is an offensive-minded coach, but I don't know that he's on that same level.
He's not a innovative offensive mind. He's got an old school playbook that he has a couple of offshoots, maybe has 3 or 4 plays out of the same set. It's going to be interesting to see how he changes his mindset to fit Saban. Like we talked about earlier, how Saban evolves to match what's happening currently. O'Brien's not there yet. Sarkisian was there. Sarkisian was working at a completely different level. O'Brien, to me, is an average offensive mind at best. You saw what he did at Houston. He got fired for a reason. So you saw what he did at Penn State. I mean, he went 15-9 in 2 seasons before the Texans hired him, but we'll see. I don't think he's going to be a good fit in Tuscaloosa. That's just my opinion.
He might be a one and done. You come back, you have success at Alabama, you go back into the National Football League, you get a head coaching gig at a lesser Power 5 school, you go back into the B1G, you go someplace else to get a head coaching gig. This is a way station. I would highly suggest to Bill O'Brien, rent, don't buy.
And the life cycle of the Nick Saban Coaching Rehabilitation Clinic continues.
Because even Butch Jones got a job at Arkansas State. Come on, if that can happen, anybody can get hired out of that system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Butch, for all his faults, Butch was a very successful coach at in Michigan and at one of the directional Michigan schools that escapes me right now. I think Central Michigan.
Chippewas.
And was very successful at Cincinnati before he moved down Interstate 75 to Knoxville. So it's not like the guy doesn't know how to coach.
Jury's still out on that one.
Anyway, I think that ought to put a wrap on the show here, guys. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We appreciate it. Hopefully you will pass the word along about this show and so many others here on the OSG Sports Podcasting Network. For OSG Nelson, for OSG J-Dub, I am OSG Phil. We are the Online Sports Guys. Have a great week, everybody. We will catch you again next week. Bye.
Bye.
Like the voice you're hearing on this podcast? It could be on your production too. Just go to goodpipesvo.com. That's goodpipesvo.com and reach out to Steve Henderson on the Contact Us page. Go to the website, click on the Contact Us page, and then see what Steve's Good Pipes can do for your upcoming project.